LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the January 13th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I picked out the weekend's 13 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really educational, informative, fair use media criticism and political analysis show for you all tonight. The political comedy source will actually be a little bit of dramatic irony. I'm positing that it's dramatic irony after I show you the clip of Donald Trump's phone interview with Fox News' Jeanine Pirro last night. There'll be some other excerpts from that interview in the news summaries on the big topic, which is Trump worked for Russia. That apparently the FBI opened an investigation into the President of the United States after he fired James Comey and wrote a draft letter with Stephen Mueller saying that it was because of Russia, and then told Lester Holt on NBC News it was because of Russia. The FBI actually opened up an investigation into Trump as to whether he was a Russian asset working for Russia, either knowingly or unwittingly being manipulated by Russia, and where that went. Well, you'll see that in all the news summaries, all the news clips, and I'll be talking about that for about the next hour in the Sunday Live Clip Roundup from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. You want to preview my 13 clips? I did say 13 clips, right? I didn't write it down in my notes, the numbers, so hope I didn't fumble that, but my 13 clips are on this list. These are the notes I use. You might not understand the notes completely, but they will let you know like who's speaking in the clips and the general topic. And like I said, the first clip I'm going to show you is about 25 seconds long from the Jeanine Pirro interview, not the part where she asked him, have you ever worked for Russia? And he said it was very insulting. You'll see that clip in a couple of the news summaries coming up. But this is what I thought was the more amusing answer, according to dramatic irony, which, or if it's dramatic irony, I'll didactically discuss that with you after we watch that 25-second clip together over here.
Right. And now, of course, little Adam Schiff, as you call him, is going to be dragging in, and Jerry Nadler are going to be dragging in Michael Cohen, an already proven liar to Congress, convicted of it. Are you worried that he's going to...
Look, I was a client of his, and, you're supposed to have lawyer-client privilege, but it doesn't matter because I'm a very honest person, frankly.
I'm a very honest person, frankly. That's the amusing part. The dramatic irony, of course, verbal irony is when the person who's speaking is saying something like saying something with discongruity between the words and the truth that create the irony, the amusing part, if you find irony amusing. But dramatic irony is when we, the viewers, can see the discongruity between the words spoken and the truth, but the actual characters in the drama, Jeanine Pirro and Donald Trump, they don't understand that the words are discongruous from the truth. That discongruity, that's the irony. The dramatic part is that we see it, but the characters in the drama do not. So, do you think that Donald Trump knows he's lying? If he knows he's lying, then it's not actually dramatic irony. And I actually have a poll question. You can click on the little eye up here in the corner about whether Trump worked for Russia. And it has sort of a corollary to the dramatic irony question because there are three answers. It's yes, knowingly, or yes, unwittingly, which is kind of like the dramatic irony part of it. Or no, you could say no, he didn't work for Russia. And there were several people who said, he's been tough on Russia in the panel discussion on Fox News. And Fox News has sort of an alternative universe view of this. But I'll give it a little bit of credence, and I'll criticize the NBC Meet the Press coverage a little bit for jumping to some conclusions based on evidence we haven't seen yet. But over on Fox News, they think this is all evidence of corruption at the FBI. And well, I'll talk about that a little later. I don't want to talk too much between the clips. I want to get to some of the news summaries, and especially the Meet the Press news summary is next. And you'll see it's actually almost all about the shutdown, although you'll see that, and then there's a whole bunch of things about the national emergency and the wall and the crisis, and there's very little mention of the New York Times and Washington Post stories about Trump's relationship with Russia, but you'll see I'll explain what I think is good and bad about this news summary after. Wait, let me see here. Right after. Actually, this one is pretty comprehensive. It's over 4 minutes long, and I'll talk about what I think the deficiencies are in the news summary after we watch together over here.
Good morning. We have two stories that are driving this day. The first, that explosive story posted by the New York Times on Friday night, that in 2017, the FBI opened an investigation into whether President Trump was working as a Russian asset as the sitting president against interests of the United States. The investigation was opened after Mr. Trump fired FBI Director James Comey because he mentioned the Russia investigation in his dismissal letter to Comey, and because the president told my colleague Lester Holt that he fired Comey in part because of the Russia investigation. Now, it's important to note that the Times says no evidence has emerged publicly that Mr. Trump was in fact working with the Russians when he fired Mr. Comey. The second big story, of course, is this government shutdown, now in its 23rd day and now officially the longest ever. What we're seeing is not so much the consequences of divided government, which voters generally say they like because each party acts as a brake on the other. No, what we're seeing are the consequences of a polarized government, with two parties that often don't talk to each other, sometimes can't talk to each other, and right now may not want to talk to each other. And caught in the middle, some 800,000 federal employees who are out of work and not currently getting paid. That has actually led some in Washington to hope President Trump follows through on his constitutionally questionable threat and declare a national emergency as a face-saving way out of this mess. If he does, this would be a national emergency designed to solve his own political emergency.
Shutting down the government is not governing.
For President Trump, the focus on a wall and the symbol it represents to his supporters may be the political crisis he needs to deflect focus from his own legal jeopardy.
They can name it whatever they can name it, peaches. I don't care what they name it, but we need money for that barrier.
But ultimately, the shutdown leaves the president boxed in and weakens him for the fights ahead. Mr. Trump responded to the Times story about the FBI's counterintelligence investigation, tweeting that it was opened for no reason and with no proof, and attacking James Comey as a total sleaze.
Are you now, or have you ever worked for Russia, Mr. President?
I think it's the most insulting thing I've ever been asked. I think it's the most insulting article I've ever had written. And if you read the article, you'd see that they found absolutely nothing.
The president's mounting legal problems are the backdrop to the shutdown stalemate. Mr. Trump and Democrats are both dug in, with no end in sight.
I don't want to give an easy way out of something as simple as this.
I'm a mother of 5, grandmother of 9. I know a temper tantrum when I see one.
After floating the idea of a, quote, national emergency.
If we don't make a deal, I would say it would be very surprising to me that I would not declare a national emergency.
On Friday, the president said he is not planning to declare one after all.
I have the absolute right to do it, but I'm not going to do it so fast.
We need to have an end game. If the end game is an emergency declaration by the president, do it now.
But most Republicans panned the idea.
Tomorrow, the national security emergency might be, climate change. So let's seize fossil fuel plants or something.
Democrats also see no incentive to negotiate.
Let's put all of this in context, right? The president at this point is holding the American people hostage over his vanity project.
Most Republicans are standing with the president for now.
It is laughable to think that you can seal a 1,900-mile border without some sort of barrier.
But the shutdown is already causing pain.
We want to work. We're not pawns. We're not bargaining chips. We're people.
Including for Mr. Trump's own voters.
Starting to get scared. I've been a Trump supporter. I think he's done a lot of wonderful things. But this is not one of them.
One White House advisor appeared to compare the shutdown for furloughed workers to a vacation.
We have a shutdown, and so they can't go to work, and so then they have the vacation. but they don't have to use their vacation days. And then they come back, and then they get their back pay, then they're, in some sense, they're better off.
And joining me now from Houston is Republican Senator.
So yeah, that's the NBC News summary. It covered the two stories, and I think it spent a lot of time on the shutdown, which is like a, you know, they say no news is good news. Well, no news is actually no news, but they still make news out of it. I mean, I guess there are inside negotiations, but in some ways I think maybe the whole shutdown is to distract from this growing Russia scandal. There's looks like lots of things are about to break in the next 6 weeks, and both with the House investigation and possibly the Mueller report, and these latest allegations. I mean, they're like the worst case scenario, and but they are just allegations. I looked through my notes while I was watching that clip, and my criticism of NBC's coverage, like I said, about being a little bit too much jumping to conclusions. I was talking about leaving out the Russia story, but that's actually something you'll see coming up in, I think, the ABC news summary, the next one, although then you'll see they get to it right away in the questioning and whatever. I'll talk about that in a second. But the problem with Meet the Press is that this New York Times story about the investigation into Trump possibly working for Russia, if it's true, which most likely is, to open up an investigation, a preliminary investigation, they need like a reasonable suspicion, and then to do a full investigation, they need articulable facts that the subject of the investigation is a Russian agent. And just based on the facts they're talking about, this supposed letter they have the draft of that Trump wrote with Stephen Mueller to fire James Comey, and then what he said to Lester Holt, even bringing the Russians into the Oval Office right the day after firing James Comey and saying he was a nut job and the pressure's off from Russia. I mean, that's a lot, but if that's all it is, that's not like some bombshell. That's all stuff we already knew. I mean, that's the thing. When this story first broke, I thought, well, this is just, seems there are no new facts in here. There's just this, other than the idea that the FBI opened up this investigation into the sitting president, which is shocking, but not surprising given the facts we know. But if there are no more facts, then it's not this huge bombshell that it was covered on NBC. And this will be even clearer, you'll see, when I show clip 11, or well, it's actually clip 10 and 11 are Chuck Todd's interview questions of Ted Cruz and Tim Kaine, a Republican and a Democratic senator. And I think his Chuck Todd's tendency to jump to conclusions on the Russia story based on what we don't know yet, I think it will be evident when I get to those clips. But then this next ABC News summary, it barely covers the Russia story at all in the introduction, which is fine because you'll see George Stephanopoulos also covers it later in a clip I will show. And he showed it in the teaser. I'm not showing the teaser, but I think I play this through where George Stephanopoulos brings it up with his first guest over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. You know, the last few years have been filled with firsts, and now we have another one. The longest government shutdown ever, now entering its fourth week with no sign yet that official Washington is ready to end it. Lawmakers left town Friday. The president's tweeting from the White House, but the two sides aren't even talking about talking. The big question now, will public pressure force either side to bend? Our brand new poll with the Washington Post shows that right now, a majority of Americans, 53%, pin the blame on President Trump and Republicans in Congress. Just 29% blame the Democrats. But support for the border wall is climbing. Last year, Americans opposed the wall by 29 points. The margin now, just 12 points. And while the shutdown is starting to cause serious stress for those federal workers missing paychecks, the vast majority of Americans, 82%, say the stalemate in Washington hasn't inconvenienced them at all. Unless that changes, don't expect compromise soon. This morning, we're going to hear from two legislators who've been in the room for those negotiations, starting with the number 2 Democrat in the Senate, Dick Durbin. Senator Durbin, thanks for joining us this morning. I do want to get to the shutdown, but first, those new stories from the New York Times and Washington Post that the FBI was so concerned, said the New York Times, about president's dealings with Russia that they opened up a counterintelligence investigation while he's in the Oval Office, and the Post report detailing how the president has concealed his private conversations with Vladimir Putin. We now know that all the relevant House chairmen say they're going to investigate these stories, think it's worthy of investigation. What's going to happen in the Senate? And do you believe that?
So, yeah, you can see he starts the questioning there of Dick Durbin, and I don't have any clips from Dick Durbin, but I did want to run it through there because I was criticizing the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary, sort of, for not really going into the allegations from the New York Times and the Washington Post. And I didn't even explain the Washington Post stuff about how Trump refuses to share, even with his closest advisors, the contents of his discussions with Vladimir Putin, even going so far as to taking the translator's notes from Helsinki, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But even though there was nothing about that in the ABC News summary, you saw that George Stephanopoulos sort of did a news summary in his introduction to his question there with Dick Durbin. And there was also something in the teaser, which is what comes on right before the part I showed. And in fact, I'm going to include the news teaser coming up in both the CBS and Fox News summaries, which I will... the Fox News one is totally the worst one. You'll see both CNN and CBS mention the Russia investigation, or the Russia revelations, I think, in the correct context. Here's Jake Tapper on CNN State of the Union talking about those allegations as well as the shutdown, saying that these news stories from the Washington Post and the New York Times have actually taken all the oxygen out of the shutdown story, which seems to be the opposite of what Trump intended, if you think that the shutdown crisis is his way of trying to distract from this Russia story. But you'll see the State of our Union is alarmed. Jake Tapper is apparently alarmed in the brief news summary from CNN this morning here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in New York, where the State of our Union is alarmed. Two major breaking stories about the Russia investigation are consuming all the oxygen in the political world, even amidst the longest government shutdown in American history. Overnight, the Washington Post reporting that President Trump has gone to, quote, extraordinary lengths to keep specifics about his meetings with Russian President Vladimir Putin secret, even keeping them from top members of his own administration. According to the Post, the president's efforts included, at least on one occasion, confiscating the notes from his interpreter. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders called the report, quote, outrageously inaccurate, though she did not offer one specific as to what she was claiming was not accurate. This major reporting comes on top of another shocking headline first reported by the New York Times that the FBI was so concerned about President Trump's actions around the time of FBI Director James Comey's firing, it opened an investigation into whether President Trump was working for Russia against U.S. interests. Take a listen to how President Trump responded Saturday night when asked directly if he has ever worked for Russia.
I think it's the most insulting thing I've ever been asked. I think it's the most insulting article I've ever had written.
The president did not directly answer the question. Joining me now, Democratic Senator Mark Warner. He's the vice chairman.
Uh-oh, I'm getting a warning from YouTube that they've detected copyrighted audio and video in my stream. Hopefully nothing bad happens. I don't know if I need to take a screenshot of that, but it is fair use. I think I mentioned right at the beginning of the show that it's fair use, but that's happened before, and then hopefully it won't be a problem. But in case you're wondering what that looks like to me in my where did that I'm getting a warning in my control panel that looks like this here. And I didn't even use the Game of Thrones clip last week of the wall coming down, but I don't know, something, well, I guess we'll see. Hopefully, I am recording this, so I can always use the recorded version if I have to, or whatever. Anyway, so you saw there that Jake Tapper actually did a little switcheroo, and he did the Washington Post allegations before the New York Times allegations. And the Washington Post allegations, the thing I wanted to say about them that I mentioned earlier is it's about Putin, the Putin meeting notes, how Trump took those and he doesn't want anyone to know from Helsinki. And that Helsinki thing, that was like one of the worst days of the Trump presidency. And I almost made the title of this video Trump Putin's Puppet, but I used that before back in July. I don't know if you all remember Trump is Putin's puppet ? But that was a live stream I did right after the Helsinki summit. I've actually put a link down to that live stream in the video description. It's pretty good. It's only 25 minutes long, and it's sort of foreshadowing this latest news. Most of what I do on these live clip roundups is not scripted. Maybe like the first minute is scripted, and I pretty much memorize that introduction for the first minute, so I don't even need the script. But that clip roundup from last July was almost completely scripted, so it's really tight. It's not quite as rambling as these Sunday shows that I sort of put together all day and then play the clips and tell you what I think about them without any script. And sometimes it is more coherent than others. I apologize when sometimes I fumble a little bit, but I have a lot of things going on all at the same time and not a lot of time to put it all together. Anyway, I have two more news summaries I want to show you. This next one is very brief from CBS's Face the Nation. And Margaret Brennan, kind of like on the ABC clip, did not talk about the Russia story at all, but it was in that teaser, and I'm going to contrast this to the Fox News Sunday clip I'm going to show next of their news summary. And I don't think the CBS Face the Nation one was as bad because Margaret Brennan does mention again. I'm actually going to criticize Margaret Brennan's interview of Mike Pompeo that I'm going to show a little bit later, where she asks him about this Russia investigation, the New York Times and Washington Post revelations. But anyway, here's 35 seconds from CBS's Face the Nation this morning here.
Problems for the president as news reports raise more questions about his ties to Russia. Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. It's day 23 of the partial government shutdown, now the longest in history, and there's no end in sight. Some 800,000 federal workers did not get paid Friday, and even President Trump concedes he has, quote, no idea whether he can get a deal with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. We spoke earlier with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo from Abu Dhabi, one of the stops on a 9-country trip through the Middle East.
So, like I said, I'll have a clip of that Mike Pompeo interview. But that was just a very brief news summary from CBS's Face the Nation that was all about the shutdown. But they did mention the New York Times and Washington Post stories in the teaser. And you'll see that Margaret Brennan brought them up as a real issue with Mike Pompeo in ways that I will criticize when I get to clip number 9. But the next one, we're on clip number 7 here. So that's a few clips in the future. The clip number 7 is the last of the news summaries. This is the Fox News. Oh, wait, sorry. Clip number 6 is the Fox News summary. It starts off, and I do show from the teaser. I took a little clip from the Fox News teaser like I did from the CBS Face the Nation teaser because they do mention the Russia revelations in the teaser, but then they ask, and what does this mean for the Mueller investigation? Not the Trump presidency, but the Mueller investigation. And that is pretty much the spin on Fox News Sunday, that these revelations that the FBI opened up an investigation into Trump, and Trump's been preparing this defense for like a year now, it means that the FBI is corrupt, not Trump is corrupt, the FBI is corrupt. And that is definitely the spin you'll see when Kevin Corke does his news summary after getting the introduction from Chris Wallace. Kevin Corke mentions the allegations, but then immediately gives the president's attorney a rebuttal, John Dowd, who I don't even think is his attorney anymore, and then goes to the Jeanine Pirro clip kind of what you already saw on the previous news summary. This is longer because it's from Fox News itself. And this is a little under 3-minute news summary, including a brief teaser from the introduction before Chris Wallace says, "Hello again, it's Fox News Sunday. Welcome to Fox." Anyway, you'll see, and I will discuss it with you after we watch it together over here.
Then, the New York Times reports the FBI investigated whether President Trump was working for the Russians. We'll ask our Sunday panel what the bombshell revelation means for the Mueller investigation. All right now on Fox News Sunday. And hello again from Fox News in Washington. The government shutdown is now in week 4, the longest in U.S. history, a record no one here in Washington can be proud of. Hundreds of thousands of federal workers face their first payday Friday without getting paid. Talks to reopen 9 federal departments have broken down, and lawmakers are out of town till tomorrow afternoon. Meanwhile, the president has gone back and forth on whether to declare a national emergency at the border. Let's get the latest now from Kevin Corke live at the White House. Kevin.
Chris, from the White House to the southern border, a more measured tone from administration officials this week about the need for enhanced border security, a lot less talk about a wall, and more about the exploding humanitarian crisis.
We're here today to address the humanitarian and security crisis on our southern border. This is a humanitarian crisis, a crisis of the heart and a crisis of the soul.
This is a severe humanitarian and security crisis.
On Twitter, Mr. Trump insisted that Democrats come back from their vacations and get back to work. I'm in the White House ready to sign. A sharp-elbowed reference, perhaps, to the dozens of Democratic lawmakers who traveled to Puerto Rico this weekend for a retreat, where they hope to strategize ways to help the dead-mired U.S. territory, and even plan to see a special performance of the hit Broadway show Hamilton. This, as the New York Times reported, that the FBI allegedly looked into whether or not the president was secretly working on behalf of Russia during and following the 2016 campaign, a suggestion that drew a scathing rebuke from the president's attorney John Dowd, who wrote, "The New York Times story is an unwitting disclosure and verification of the utter corruption of their oaths by Comey and his colleagues to undermine the free election of the President of the United States."
Are you now, or have you ever worked for Russia, Mr. President?
I think it's the most insulting thing I've ever been asked. I think it's the most insulting article I've ever had written.
Quite a week here in Washington. By the way, Chris, the White House has asked the Army Corps of Engineers to look into additional possible ways to help fund border security, including an examination of the 2018 February emergency supplemental. They say that would actually draw funds from disaster relief. We'll see if that happens, Chris.
Kevin Corke reporting from a snowy White House. Kevin, thank you. Joining us now from South.
And I will have a Lindsey Graham clip. That's actually the next clip coming up, where Lindsey Graham does all the Republican talking points. But did you see, I think I pretty much pre-criticized that clip. But, you know, I'm going to have a bonus Dash and Sandy clip at the end. But during that clip, I can't believe it. You know, Sandy's right over there. You want to see, like, the sleepy barks? Sandy was just barking in her sleep here. I just sent it. Here's an 18-second clip. Let's see if it works over here. So it's not quite the Sandy cam, but that was taken during the clip I just played. That was Sandy was barking in her sleep. I don't know what she was barking at. You can let me know what you think down in the comments section. But I pre-criticized. Maybe she was barking at the Fox News bias that I talked about. She heard me talking about the Fox News bias before I showed the clip, and then she was barking at the Fox News bias during, you know, in her sleep. She was dreaming about Fox News bias and being a Fox News bias watchdog. What do you think? Is that a reasonable explanation? I don't know. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. But if you think that the spin was bad in that clip, wait till you see here where Chris Wallace asked this question of Lindsey Graham in this next clip. it's almost like a softball question, like, you know, what do you? It's kind of ambiguous, but it leaves open whether he's saying, you know, what do you think this means for the FBI? You know, it's shocking. He leaves open a little bit whether it's an attack on the FBI or an attack on the Trump administration, or bad for the FBI or bad for the Trump administration. But Lindsey Graham doesn't leave any doubt. He uses all the Republican talking points. Apparently, there were talking points sent out to all the Republicans saying, you're supposed to attack the leaks of this information that went to the New York Times and the Washington Post. You're supposed to attack the FBI. Oh, and you're supposed to attack the New York Times itself. So yeah, it's attack the leaks, attack the New York Times, attack the FBI. That seems to be the Republican strategy, all played out here by Lindsey Graham in about 2.5 minutes, talking to Chris Wallace as a very friendly softball interviewer over here.
Subjects on the New York Times now reports that after President Trump fired FBI Director James Comey, that the Bureau opened up a counterintelligence investigation into whether or not the President of the United States was working on behalf of the Russians. 1, did you know about that? 2, what do you think of, I have to say, it's an astonishing idea, the FBI, the Bureau, investigating whether the President was a Russian agent.
Well, number one, that story came from somebody who leaked it with an agenda. So I'd like to know who leaked it, because they have an agenda not very friendly to President Trump. And I, for one, don't trust what I read in the New York Times. Having said all that, I'm going to ask the FBI director, was there a counterintelligence investigation opened up regarding the president as being a potential agent of the Russians? I find it astonishing. And to me, it tells me a lot about the people running the FBI, McCabe and that crowd. I don't trust them as far as I throw them. So if this really did happen, Congress needs to know about it. And what I want to do is make sure, how could the FBI do that? What kind of checks and balances are there?
You have a lot of clout in asking the FBI questions because you're the new chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Congratulations, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Your committee is going to begin holding confirmation hearings this week on the president's nomination of William Barr to be the new Attorney General. What do you intend to ask him about the special counsel investigation and whether or not the special counsel is going to be allowed to finish his investigation and issue a full, unedited report to Congress?
I'm going to ask him, do you see any reason to fire Mr. Mueller based on what you know now for cause? Do you trust Mr. Mueller to be fair to the president and the country? Will you make sure he can finish his job? If you get the report, will you be as transparent as possible? I've asked him those questions, and I'm very comfortable with his answers. I think he'd be a great Attorney General. Great job by the president to pick Mr. Barr. I see no evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians, but that'll be up to Mr. Mueller to make his report to Attorney General Barr, and he soon will, I hope.
Another question for the new.
So, like I said, that's all the Republican talking points there, with a softball interviewer on Fox News Sunday this morning. Lindsey Graham, he's going to be the last senator to peel off from the Trump administration. You know, I've talked before that, I've said before, I think impeachment is pretty much inevitable. With it only takes a majority of the House of Representatives to impeach Trump, and even if the Mueller investigation only includes the stuff we already know, it's pretty likely the Democrats will impeach Trump. Then it takes 2/3 of the Senate, if you read your Constitution, to remove Trump, and that's going to require not only all the Democrats, but 20 Republicans, and it doesn't look like Lindsey Graham's going to be one of them. And I'll show Ted Cruz seems like, I don't know, he might be one of those 20 someday when I get to the Ted Cruz clip. But there are a lot of Republican talking points that have to be swept away by the Mueller report, and you saw some of them there. Another one is in this next clip, another Republican. This is Steve Scalise, who is, I think he the number 3 Republican in the House at this point. I didn't take the Kevin McCarthy clip that was on CBS's Face the Nation. He's actually the number 1 Republican in the House at this point. But this is Steve Scalise bringing up the one Republican talking point on this that you didn't hear from Lindsey Graham, which is about how tough Trump has been on Russia, that which isn't really true, and I'll talk about why it's not really true after we watch that 1 minute 53-second clip. George Stephanopoulos interviewing Steve Scalise on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos this morning over here.
Response to those news stories in the New York Times and the Washington Post about the Russia investigation and the president. We do know that the new House chairman of Foreign Affairs, of Intelligence, Judiciary are going to be investigating these questions. And you heard Senator Durbin just say he has real questions about President Trump's entire approach to Putin. What's your response?
Well, look at the facts. And again, I mean, it seems like the Democrats have this massive infatuation with Russia and Putin. Now, they didn't seem to be concerned about Russia when Barack Obama was president and letting Russia run roughshod over Eastern Europe. President Trump has taken more steps to stand up against Russia than anybody we've seen in a long time. Look at what he's done with the Ukraine. Russia was running through the Ukraine when Barack Obama was president. The Ukrainians asked for help from America. They didn't ask for troops. They said, look, send us some of the tank-busting missiles that you have so that we can stop Russia. Barack Obama said no. Donald Trump said yes and helped the Ukrainians to push back Russia out of the Ukraine. Look at what he's done with Iran. And you've seen this partnership between Russia and Iran. President Trump has stood up against Iran, the bad deal that allows Iran to get a nuclear weapon. You've seen time and time again with sanctions, with other things, President Trump standing up against Russia. This whole idea of collusion, they've investigated this. The Mueller investigation's gone on for over a year. They found no collusion between Trump and Russia. The House did its own investigation and found no collusion. And so at some point, as they meander around looking for something, it looks like a witch hunt if they don't put facts on the table. Have they found collusion? I've seen none, George. They've put no facts on the table to show there's collusion. There's a strong record of President Trump standing up to Russia and pushing back and supporting our allies in Eastern Europe who have been looking for that for a long time.
Before we go, I want to ask you about your colleague, Steve King.
So that's another one of the Republican talking points, that Trump has been so tough on Russia, but actually a lot of the toughness has come from the Congress, and Trump had to go along. The toughness on Iran, well, that is, Iran is a client of Russia's, but Iran is also the mortal enemy of Saudi Arabia, who is like Saudi Arabia is another country that Trump might actually be indebted to in various ways. That's a whole other possible avenue of Trump collusion. There's like the Trump-Saudi Arabia collusion. I noticed in the live comments here. Let me see if I can. A comment there from Kinky that Trump is an agent of Saudi Arabia and Israel, Russia not so much. Well, could be Saudi Arabia and Russia. That's the point I was trying to make with that last commentary there. But now I'm finishing up my Republicans before I get to the Democrats. I have Mike Pompeo and Ted Cruz to finish up the Republicans. Then I have Tim Kaine and Mark Warner as the Democrats. Then my final news clip is actually the Chuck Todd data download, which shows victory for liberals. It could actually, I don't know, maybe I should even take credit for, from my LiberalViewer channel for 12 years and like 60 million video views. So I've like single-handedly rehabilitated the term liberal. No, but maybe I've helped a little bit. Well, that'll be the last clip. But so I have 2 more Republicans, then 2 Democrats, and then good news for liberals from NBC's Meet the Press and Chuck Todd's data download. Then the bonus Dash and Sandy clip, also with the Meet the Press background that I'll talk about when I get to that clip. But now here we have Mike Pompeo on CBS's Face the Nation with not using any Republican talking points to try to rebut these allegations from the New York Times and the Washington Post, just saying it's ludicrous, it's ridiculous, not even worth answering. Kind of like what you saw in Jake Tapper's analysis from the CNN State of the Union news summary, where he talked about how they were non-denial denials, or these long, like, saying it's false, it's defamatory, but there's no specifics about anything being wrong. And then Trump like spent 3 minutes talking to Jeanine Pirro. Her question, did you ever work for Russia? there was no, he never said no. He just went off on all these tangents. But anyway, here's Mike Pompeo with the short version, just ludicrous. But I'm actually starting this clip with something Mike Pompeo said that was inexplicable. I think it was a mistake, where he was talking about how we need the wall on the southern border, and Margaret Brennan asked Mike Pompeo about the State Department saying that terrorists don't come in through the southern border, and he's saying, oh, they come in by land, by sea, by air. You remember that from Sarah Huckabee Sanders last week if you watched the live clip roundup. But then at the end of that answer, and that's the beginning of this clip, he inexplicably says, we have to keep our southern border as the weak link in our national security, or whatever. I think he meant we have to keep it from being the weak link, is what he meant to say. Margaret Brennan did not follow up on that at all, and then asked him questions about the allegations from the New York Times and the Washington Post, and then didn't follow up on that either. So bad follow-up from Margaret Brennan in the 1 minute 10-second clip I will talk about with you a little more after we watch together over here.
The weakest link, and we need to make sure that the weakest link in our national security is on our southern border.
I want to get to your trip through the Middle East, but I first want to ask you about this New York Times report that says right after President Trump fired former FBI Director James Comey, the FBI began investigating whether President Trump himself was a potential threat to national security and whether he'd been working for Russia or unintentionally influenced by Moscow. What is your reaction to this?
I'm not going to comment on New York Times stories, but I'll certainly say this. The notion that President Trump is a threat to American national security is absolutely ludicrous.
Just to clarify, since you were CIA director, did you have any idea that this investigation was happening?
Margaret, I've answered this question repeatedly, indeed, on your show. The idea that's contained in the New York Times story that President Trump was a threat to American national security is silly on its face and not worthy of a response.
One of the reasons you're in the Middle East is to reassuring...
So the follow-up about him being CIA director, that actually seems to bolster his comment, because it makes him sound less partisan. But he actually used to be a partisan Republican. He was also part of the Trump transition. So bad follow-up at the end of that from Margaret Brennan. And then at the beginning, when he said that we have to maintain our southern border as the weak link in our national whatever, he no follow-up on that obvious gaffe or misstatement from Mike Pompeo at the beginning there. So I don't know. You can let me know what you think about CBS's Face the Nation and Margaret Brennan if you want, down in the comment section. I also saw my Super Chat contributions during that last clip. That's one of the ways that people can support me continuing to make these videos. I'm almost up to 300 live stream Sunday live clip roundup Sunday LiberalViewer Sunday live clip roundups in a row. I should be able to say that phrase after 299 in a row, right? So I appreciate the support. Here's what the support Lulu Girl, Sexy Bob, and of course My Earth. That's another $100 My Earth. I know. I think last month I got a $100 contribution from My Earth. So the Super Chat contributions help. Direct PayPal contributions help. There's a link down in the video description to that. Also, my monthly patrons on Patreon. I have a link down to that in the video description. But like I said, I now want to move on to one more Republican before my two Democrats. This is Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz with a beard. I was thinking, you know, I've got my Mr. Spock mug here, and if you know, the Spock with the beard was the evil Spock. So does that mean that the Ted Cruz with the beard should be the good Ted Cruz? Well, I don't know. This is Ted Cruz not totally dismissing the New York Times and Washington Post stories. I mean, not using even the Republican talking points about attacking the leakers and the FBI and the New York Times that you saw from Lindsey Graham here. He's like, wait and see. I don't know. Maybe Ted Cruz could be one of those 20 Republican senators. I mean, Donald Trump did attack his wife and his dad during the campaign. he did, Ted Cruz during the 2016 campaign did say that Donald Trump was a pathological liar, so it's not like it would be totally anathema to any position Ted Cruz has ever taken. And so if you watch this 2-minute, 49-second clip from NBC's Meet the Press, you'll see Ted Cruz doesn't rule out the fact that Trump actually was a Russian agent. He wants to hear more, and he wants to change the subject, but he doesn't say it's not true over in this clip.
Reported on Friday night that the FBI, after the Comey firing, because of what the president said, both in a letter to Mr. Comey and to my colleague Lester Holt, they opened up a counterintelligence investigation concerned that a sitting president was working on behalf of a foreign agent. How much of a concern is this to you?
Well, I don't know the details of the specifics there. I know what was reported publicly in the media. And I sit on the Senate Judiciary Committee, so we will consider any allegations that come forward. But I'll tell you, Chuck, something that is really interesting. You and I all work in Washington, but I also come back to Texas just about every week. I'm back outside the Beltway. There is an incredible divide between Washington and the rest of the country when it comes to Bob Mueller and the Russia investigation. The mainstream media, Washington is obsessed with it. And when you get outside the Beltway, I don't find anybody concerned with this at all. They're concerned with jobs, lower taxes, higher wages, more opportunity. They're concerned with securing the border. So the questions I get are not about the latest obsession and allegations about Russia, Russia, Russia. They're about, hey, when are we actually going to secure the border? When are we going to keep making this country safer? So that's going to stay my focus. As a member of Judiciary Committee, I'll consider whatever evidence is produced, but I'm not going to base it on unsubstantiated media reports.
How about on the Foreign Relations Committee? The Washington Post is reporting that the president basically is not sharing what he discusses with Vladimir Putin behind closed doors. Do you think you guys in the Senate ought to, for instance, subpoena a translator so that you have a real readout of what the president and Vladimir Putin are saying to each other?
You know, I think it's premature for that. I've seen the allegations. I want to find out a little bit more about what happened there. I want to learn more than just the allegations in the press. Listen, I will say, if you compare objectively President Trump's policies to Russia compared to President Obama's policies to Russia, by any measure, President Obama was much easier, was much more gentle on Russia. You and I both recall Obama leaning over on a hot mic and saying just before the 2012 election, tell Vladimir I'll have a lot more flexibility after the election. Now, there they weren't keeping notes. It just happened to be a network had a camera going. If you compare substance, for example, Trump went to NATO and urged the Europeans, don't let the Russians build a pipeline through Europe. You want to talk about what actually makes a difference standing up to Russia? That on policy was far, far more important than much of the weakness and appeasement we saw under Obama.
And finally, before I let you go, I want to get you to comment on
So that's Senator Ted Cruz, like I said, not ruling out the fact that Trump was a Russian agent, a dupe of the Russian intelligence agency, Putin's puppet. All those things are possible, but he changed the subject because no one he talks to outside of Washington D.C. really cares about the whole Russia story. Well, maybe that will change in 2019. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. You can let me know what you think about whether Trump worked for Russia, knowingly, unwittingly, or not at all, at a little poll question I put that you can click on up in that corner there. You can let me know what you think about Ted Cruz's beard, whether it improves Ted Cruz in any way, which, I don't know. I mean, it's not like there's any way to go but up, in my opinion. But this next clip, this is the first of the two Democrats I have talking about this. And I mentioned earlier, before and after I showed the Meet the Press news summary, that this was the clip where you're going to see Chuck Todd be a little bit too credulous, maybe, jumping to conclusions. I was talking about how, unless there's more, and, you know, the Mueller investigation and the FBI counterintelligence investigation, they have access to all sorts of secret sources, wiretaps, NSA taps. They may know like what the Russians said at, you know, I was talked about how Trump brought the Russian ambassador into the Oval Office the day after he fired Comey and supposedly said, you know, Comey was a nut job and now the pressure's off on the Russia investigation since I fired Comey. And there were no American photographers in the Oval Office, just a Russian photographer, and that whole thing is a little bit disturbing. And the FBI and the Mueller investigation may have access to things the Russians said afterwards. Like they may know a lot more about what Trump did than we do, and that's possible. But that's like a black box. The Mueller investigation is like, until we get the Mueller report, we shouldn't really depend on speculation of what might be there. And you'll see, and Chuck Todd seems to be sort of jumping to conclusions, especially at the very end of this clip. It's almost as bad a softball questioning of Tim Kaine, a vice presidential candidate and now senator, as I complained about with Fox News Sunday, the softball interview of Chris Wallace of Lindsey Graham, because you'll see the first question Chuck Todd asked Tim Kaine is like, you know, during the 2016 campaign when you were the vice presidential candidate, you warned us about how Trump could be involved with Russia, and, you know, you were so right. Don't you feel like you were so right? So that's kind of a softball. And then check out what Chuck Todd says at the very end of this when he's promoting the next segment that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch this clip together over here.
On the campaign trail in 2016, you spent the last 2 months regularly questioning the president, at that time, candidate Donald Trump's ties to Vladimir Putin, complimentary ways he talked about things. So you have those questions that you had as a candidate. Now you have this story in the New York Times that has the FBI worried that the president acted on Comey at the behest of the Russian government. What does that tell you where things are now? Does that mean that Democrats should be looking at actually beginning impeachment proceedings? Or is this something you think let the Mueller probe go first? How much more do you need to know?
We've got to protect the Mueller investigation. You're right. I was very worried about this, you know, in 2016 because the president took a public stage in July and encouraged Russia to cyber hack the election at the same time as my son and his entire battalion were deployed helping allies on the border of Russia protect themselves against Russian aggression. I found that highly unusual for any American, much less somebody who wanted to be president. But now what we have is, you know, nearly 100 documented instances of ties between the Trump campaign transition and administration with Russia, bizarre failure to be honest about meetings, and now this indication that President Trump has gone to unusual lengths to hide the content of discussions with Vladimir Putin. But the right answer is, as you suggest, it is to protect the Mueller investigation at all costs, let it get to its end, make sure that the results are made public.
Are you at all concerned, though, that the FBI looked like it overreacted in trying to investigate a sitting president this way? I mean, this is a pretty alarming investigation, that the sitting president was acting against the interests of the United States of America.
Well, I flipped the question around, Chuck. I think it's less did the FBI overreact. I think the question is this. They had to have a very deep level of concern about this president to take this step. And that's, again, why we need to protect the Mueller investigation. And I think that's going to be a critical issue in the Judiciary Committee hearings about the Attorney General nominee. Will you guarantee to protect this investigation, and will you make sure that the American public and Congress get the results of it?
Senator Tim Kaine, Democrat from Virginia. I have to let you go there. Thanks for coming on and sharing your views, sure.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it. When we come back, we're going to have more on that story about Russia, the FBI, and President Trump. I'm going to talk to Michael Schmidt. He's one of the New York Times reporters who broke the story, and NBC News legal analyst Ben Wittes on why this story may be even bigger than it seems.
On why this story may be even bigger than it seems, and of all the things on Meet the Press this morning, that was the thing that I think was the most breathless, speculative. I mean, it could be true. but we don't have the evidence yet. And there was this whole conversation there with the New York Times reporter and then Ben Wittes, who's like a friend of James Comey and a law professor and does the Lawfare blog and did a great post on this that's worth reading. But like I said, they're talking about things we don't know about yet, like that supposedly the FBI knows and Mueller knows, and until the Mueller report comes out publicly and we find out, you know, what this extra evidence is, it could be like what Chuck Todd asked. And he did ask one sort of like Fox News-ish question about a minute before the end of that clip about, is this too much? Did the FBI go too far? And that's the whole Trump Fox News argument on this. And that depends on whether the FBI knows more than we know now. And hopefully we'll find that out in the next 6 weeks. And at least Chuck Todd did bring that up. But I think that the Meet the Press coverage was a little bit too breathless and speculative, as you saw in the last 30 seconds of that clip there, where Chuck Todd was saying could be even worse. And Ben Wittes has this whole theory that the obstruction of justice was the collusion, because it's not really obstruction of justice. Obstruction of justice is a criminal investigation. Obstruction of justice is a criminal charge. And what this is about is the FBI decided, oh, this isn't, when Trump fired Comey, he didn't do it just to obstruct justice. He did it to obstruct national security. And so they opened a counterintelligence investigation, which isn't to find out who committed a crime, is to find out how foreign countries are infiltrating the United States in various different ways, in this case our elections. And a counterintelligence investigation isn't necessarily something where you try to charge people with the crime. It may take a long time, and you may have some long-range plan to mess up the foreign country, or who knows what's going on with that. I mean, it's not obstruction of justice, it's obstruction of national security. And if you want to see that whole discussion on Meet the Press with Ben Wittes and the Mike Schmidt, the New York Times reporter, you can go to Meet the Press at a link I put down in the video description. But if you want to hear like the most innuendo and suggestion on this whole thing, of all the Democrats, it came from Senator Mark Warner, who's the ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, so he knows a lot of stuff. And the thing is, if the FBI opened a counterintelligence investigation into Donald Trump sometime after he fired James Comey and talked to Lester Holt on NBC News and said, you know, he was thinking about Russia when he did it, well, they probably informed the so-called Gang of Eight, which includes the ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, Mark Warner. And Mark Warner says, well, if they did inform us, this is what they would have said. It's almost like the O.J. Simpson, if I did it, this is what would have happened, or whatever. And Chuck Todd tries to find out, well, did they inform you? And he never really says. He sort of like hints, and there's sort of like this kabuki dance going on in the second to last, the penultimate news clip before I show the good news clip about how liberalism is winning. But this is a almost 5-minute clip of Senator Mark Warner talking to Chuck Todd, laying out the evidence of collusion, laying out what could be in the Mueller report, and hinting that more is to come over here.
I know you're very eager to talk about the government shutdown. You have tens of thousands of constituents directly affected, but I do want to start on this FBI counterintelligence investigation into the president to see if whether or not he'd been working on behalf of the Russians. President Trump slammed the idea last night as the most insulting thing he's ever been asked, adding, quote, they found absolutely nothing. On its face, it's a stunning turn of events. Do you think the president of the United States ever worked on behalf of the Russians against American interests?
Well, Jake, that's the defining question of our investigation and the Mueller investigation. Was there collusion? I'm not going to talk about what we may have been briefed in the Gang of Eight when these investigations opened, but I do think it's curious that throughout that whole summer, when these investigations started, you had Vladimir Putin policies almost being parroted by Donald Trump. You had Trump say only nice things about Putin. He never spoke ill about Russia. The Republican campaign doctrines softened on Russia and decreased their willingness to defend Ukraine. There was a series of outside actions. I think we all remember when Trump in his bluster basically said to the Russians, if you've got more emails, bring them on. These are not actions of a traditional president for the United States.
All right,
Layer
but
on top of that, now...
Let me just push back for 1 second, because President Trump... Okay, go ahead. Finish.
Well, I just think we need to put this, all three pieces of what happened in context of last week. We have the story of the level of concern that the FBI had, again, if the story is correct, to, in a sense, open their own investigation whether Donald Trump was compromised. We have on top of that the fact of the most recent story that Trump had a series of meetings with Putin, which he broke all protocol, where normally these meetings you bring in top aides so that there is some record so you can have the appropriate follow-up. In these meetings, he brought in Tillerson once, but the other meetings were simply with the interpreter, and the interpreter was then restricted on, in a sense, sharing that information, to the point that we still don't know, the American government does not know what was discussed between Trump and Vladimir Putin in that, frankly, pathetic, embarrassing encounter where Trump was kowtowing on the world stage to Vladimir Putin in Helsinki. It was one of the worst days post-World War II in terms of America's lack of leadership against a dictator like Putin. And then finally, I know this, people have to stretch their memory, but we have to remember all the way back at the beginning of the week when the stories came out that Trump's campaign chairman was sharing proprietary campaign data with a known Russian agent, Mr. Kalimnik, who has ties both to Putin, and Kalimnik, who has ties to the Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska, the very same oligarch that the Trump administration now wants to try to remove the sanctions on. I think this week, I've been waiting for a long time for Mueller to kind of move forward. I think we're seeing these independent actions, even independent of Mueller, which is the lead up and some of the rationale about why this investigation started and why so many Americans like myself have been concerned for so long.
So, Senator, just very briefly, you just said a lot. You seem to confirm that as a member of the Gang of Eight, which is congressional leadership and the leadership of the House and Senate Intelligence Committees, you just seem to confirm that you had been briefed when this counterintelligence investigation was launched by the FBI.
I'm not going to comment on any of the contents.
I'm not asking for the content, but you seem to confirm that it happened, though. That there was that you were advised as a member of the Gang of Eight.
What I was saying was, subsequent to that briefing, there was of enough concern that the Senate Intelligence Committee, in a bipartisan fashion, the House Intelligence Committee in a slightly less bipartisan fashion, launched investigations. Our investigation is almost, it's not quite 2 years in, but we have literally spoken to hundreds of witnesses. We may have spoken to even more witnesses than Mueller, and we have a very important story to tell to the American public.
So you just laid out a whole...
So I would like to hear that story that the Senate Intelligence Committee has to tell. It's supposedly a bipartisan investigation that wasn't tainted by partisanship like Devin Nunes and the House Intelligence Committee investigation that was basically shilling for the Trump administration. And he says they've even talked to more witnesses than Mueller, so that's something to look forward to in addition to the new House investigations and the Mueller report that supposedly is going to come out February, March, who knows? They said February, they said March, they said, well, that's what NBC News reported as early as February. Other people have said, I've heard now, February, March could, well, I'll be here to report on it in any case. And you've noticed also Mark Warner, he hinted about what they might have been briefed by the FBI, the Gang of Eight, way back in when in early 2017 when the FBI supposedly opened this investigation into Trump as a possible Russian agent, but he didn't confirm it, but he kind of did. If you read between the lines, or I don't know, you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And he also said that the Helsinki summit was, I had said earlier when I talked about my live stream, Trump is Putin's puppet, that I did back in July at the time of the Helsinki summit. And if you want to see that 25-minute live stream, I have a link down in the video description. I highly recommend it because, like I said, it's a pretty tight 25 minutes with good clips, including a clip of Hillary Clinton predicting this whole thing. So go check that out if you have 25 minutes to watch it. And I said that I thought that was like one of the worst days of the Trump presidency. You heard Mark Warner say there it's one of the worst days of American foreign policy since World War II. That might be hyperbole, or I don't know, maybe not. I'd have to think about that. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And so the last clip, I promised some good news on liberalism. I started this LiberalViewer channel back in July of 2006. So it's been well over 12 years, and actually one of my original aims of starting the LiberalViewer channel was to sort of rehabilitate the word liberal. I thought people didn't understand what liberal meant. It means like tolerant, supportive of civil liberties, broad-minded. Look it up in the dictionary. I've been arguing about this for like a dozen years now. And some people say, you know, I just got this book, almost all these books behind me, not the new Jim Crow, which is, I will never take down. It is like the Bible of Black Lives Matter movement, the Bible of the anti-mass incarceration movement. I'm not taking this book down ever, but I've rotated some of the books. More and more of these books up here are now books that I have not read. But one book I just added is one that was on, I added it because it was on Barack Obama's like best books of 2018 list. Why Liberalism Failed. And why did it fail? I don't know. I haven't read this book yet, like some of the books back here. But apparently liberalism didn't fail if you watched NBC's Meet the Press data download. Liberalism, I told you I started this channel in 2006, and in the dozen or so years since I started it, with one of the aims being to have the negative connotations of liberalism diminished. I've gotten 60 million video views. Some people I may have convinced a few people over the years that the word liberal is not a bad word. Well, apparently since 1996 is when they've been polling where for the data download here, Chuck Todd is going to give you good news for liberals. Although in some ways I think the word liberals started to get a bad name from progressives, where some of the progressives that I work with think that liberals are like too conservative for the progressive movement. But I'll talk about that a little more after we watch this data download final news clip of the night from NBC News's Meet the Press, Chuck Todd this morning here.
Welcome back. Data download time. When it comes to ideology, there's actually a degree of difference within the parties, not just between them. There are conservative Democrats and liberal Republicans. But here's a question we had in response to data released from Gallup this week. Among Democrats, is the term liberal no longer a dirty word? Boy, will that have some impact on 2020. 2018 was the first time a majority of Democrats, 51% of them, called themselves liberal. 13% said they were conservative, while only 34% of Democrats refer to themselves as moderate. It's quite a change from where things stood when Bill Clinton was president. In 1994, 25% of Democrats called themselves liberal, 25% called themselves conservative, the rest moderate. And it's not just Democrats, by the way, who are more comfortable calling themselves liberal. The public overall is more comfortable calling themselves liberal. In 1992, 17% of Americans said they were liberal. In 2018, the number is now 26%, a 9-point increase. And in the same period of time, the percentage of folks calling themselves conservative remained mostly flat among the electorate as a whole, while the percentage of moderates has decreased by 8 points. Hello, polarization. Now, the shift in language we use is actually mirroring the shifting attitudes in our politics. Consider issues that used to be criticized as, quote, too liberal in the mid-90s. Only 25% of Americans were in favor of marijuana legalization, and only 27% believed gay marriage should be recognized. 2018, those numbers, 66 and 67% respectively. And these aren't just random issues. Bill Clinton was the Democratic candidate who felt that he had to say, quote, he didn't inhale marijuana, and he was the Democratic president who signed the Defense of Marriage Act. These issues were a big part of his candidacy and presidency. Here's further evidence the electorate has shifted leftward. In 1992, 41% of Americans believed their taxes were about right or too low. Believe it or not, in 2018, a majority of Americans, 51%, said the same thing. None of this is to say the United States is now some bastion of liberalism. More people overall still consider themselves moderate and conservative. But as the Democratic Party moves even more leftward in the age of Trump, pay attention to how 2020 Democrats handle issues the liberal base of the party is pushing for, like Medicare for all or abolishing and replacing ICE. When we come back, Endgame and why...
So there you go. Yay, liberals. And if you want to get your hashtag LiberalViewer weatherproof vinyl bumper sticker, you don't have to have a car. You can put it on something other than a bumper. But if you want to get this sticker, you can give me a $5 contribution on PayPal with your shipping address down in the link in the video description, or do the same thing on Patreon as a monthly subscriber. I send these out to everyone who gives me $5 or $5 a month. I'm proud of my small part in helping rehabilitate the word liberal and making it more popular over the years. I hope some of my viewers out there are proud liberals, and I've helped you be proud of your liberalism. I hope you appreciate the clips I picked out, the 13 clips from the big 5 corporate outlets of the corporate media that gave you the news as they saw it this morning. If you like what I did, you can give me a thumbs up. You can give me a supportive comment, or you can support my videos at links I've talked about in the video description multiple times now. And you can see that I started off around 6 a.m. That's what, like 11 hours ago. And you can see I had Dash and Sandy with me. Here's a Dash and Sandy clip when I started watching Meet the Press around 6 a.m. this morning. That's when, and so I've been working on this for 11 hours. I'm almost done now. And about 5 seconds into this 1-minute clip where you'll hear the Meet the Press intro for the first minute of Meet the Press, about 5 seconds in, you will actually see Dash, the cat, mew. You can kind of even hear it, but you'll see the mew. About the end of the shutdown, I don't know, but it's Dash and Sandy interacting when I started my day 11 hours ago to pick out these clips for you that I can add my commentary and my media criticism and political commentary for you, and provide it all for your discussion, live viewers, and for the recorded show. But anyway, here's Dash and Sandy this morning here.
This Sunday, when will this end? The government shutdown now in its 23rd day. Negotiations going nowhere.
Our meeting did not last long.
And he just got up and said, then we have nothing to discuss, and he just walked out.
President Trump says he can declare a national emergency.
I haven't done it yet. I may do it. If this doesn't work out, probably I will do it.
Then insists he doesn't want to.
I'd rather not do it because this is something that Congress should easily do.
With neither side giving in and Congress not even in town, is there any way out of this mess? Joining me this morning, Republican Senator Ted Cruz of Texas and Democratic Senator Kaine of Virginia. Plus, the bombshell Russia story. The New York Times reports the FBI opened an investigation into whether the sitting president was secretly working for Russia against the United States. At the heart of the probe, Mr. Trump's firing of FBI Director James Comey and evidence that he linked it to the Russia investigation.
So there you go. The first minute of Meet the Press. that I watched way back 11 hours ago with Dash and Sandy when I started this whole day to bring you the Sunday live clip roundup that we've now watched together. Thanks for joining me. I will be doing this for the foreseeable future, including next Sunday when I will have clips from the regular political comedy sources, both HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher and NBC's Saturday Night Live are both coming back next week. If they have good political comedy, I will include them. And until next week, I guess. Oh, and thank you for, I saw I got some additional Super Chat contributors since I showed the last screenshot. So in addition to Lulu Girl, Sexy Bob, of course, My Earth, Nelson 100, Mark Latil, and Kinky, I appreciate all of your contributions and my live viewers' contributions. And until next week, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.